Today on the show, I have Borge Fagerli. Um, I know I probably said that very American and wrong, but Borge has probably his biggest claim to fame is the mile reps sort of concept that he coined. But he's also a coach and somebody who has who's really well respected in the space and as far as muscle growth and strength gains go, and just optimizing long term body composition. So want to thank Borge for coming on. I think you guys are really going to enjoy this episode.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Of course. So I think that one of the main thing I wanted to go over would be sort of how you go over individualizing training, because I think that this is probably the most important thing over time as you get more and more advanced, is sort of knowing what to track and what to look at as far as there's a lot of noise that we can look at, but there's very little signal. You get caught
Mm.
up in, people say that the pump matters or that, that muscle damage matters or a lot, or just lots of different things. And I think that caused a lot of confusion because with my following, whenever I say like, certain things, you're like, what? I thought that actually mattered or not. So I guess just to get started then, like what are basically like the things that matter the most to track?
Progress. I mean, if you're not progressing, the ability to add reps or load or both is essentially is your primary indicator that your program is working. Now, obviously, um, the people are always interested in optimizing, so fear of missing out. You're not really happy with progress if you believe that you could be progressing faster. And I try to approach it from the perspective of what's the hurry? Because accepting maybe a more realistic or even slow progress, as long as you can sustain that over time, you're probably going to end up pretty much at the same place anyway, because your genes and hormones is the ultimate limiter of how big and muscular you can get anyway. And most, I hope, want to have a long and prosperous training career. And both from experience and research going all the way back to the 40s and 50s, we know that rapid progress, because the muscle is very plastic and adaptable, it can grow really quickly and get strong really quickly, but joints and connective tissue can't keep up, doesn't have the same protein turnover rates. So you'll eventually run into some bottlenecks there down the chain where the muscle perhaps is able to grow uh, fast, but the rest can't keep up, and you get connective tissue inflammation and joint issues and pain or even worse injury. So I just try to instill in all my clients to have a more realistic rate of progression. If you're adding a rep or 2 to 3% of load on a weekly basis, that's incredibly, that's a progress that you probably shouldn't expect beyond the intermediate stage, because that's the equivalent of 100% in a year. So very few can sustain that, or it's actually more if you compound 2% and 2% and 2% of that. So just being happy with, a typical advanced powerlifter is happy to add 2.5 to 5 kilos or pounds to any of their lifts over a 12-week training cycle. So the more advanced you get, the slower realistic rate of progress you're going to have to expect. But that's the primary indicator, I think, at least in the long term. Of course, in the short term, you can increase strength without necessarily adding muscle mass, but if you sustain that increase in reps or load or both over time, then eventually, it's pretty much unavoidable that you're going to add muscle mass to that. But tracking body weight and some way of measuring your body fat percentage, I just prefer a combination of tape measure and calipers. I'm not a big fan of bioelectric impedance, and even DEXA can be somewhat inaccurate. And it's also very expensive and difficult to do on a regular basis. So um, perhaps something you can validate your caliper measurements against. Usually calipers show 3 to 5, even up to 8% lower body fat percentage than you actually do on a DEXA. And even DEXAs can be inaccurate. But having a way to track different um, physical metrics along with your ability to get stronger, I think, are the most important.
I think your discussion there about really playing the long game is probably the most important thing. When it really comes down to people that I think that they burn out or they don't, because when we start off, lifting weights is very strange, and the fact that it's unlike lots of things in life, where like I'm a musician, for example, and the more that I practice, the better I get. Whereas with
Mm.
training, it's not like that. If one of the things I always tell my clients is like if I could get bigger just by doing more, and not doing like the right amount of work for me, I would be bicep curling right now as I'm talking to you. I would always
Yeah.
be training. But that's just not how this works. And time again, I powerlift, and a lot of my clients are powerlifters. And I really did resonate with what you said about the connective tissue being the number one
Mm.
issue, and limiter for lots of people, because especially as, you know, you will see lots of times in these lower weight classes, smaller people that are weaker tend to be able to tolerate higher volumes, higher frequencies, and even need it from a skill perspective
Mm.
aspect. However, you will not find there's a big difference between people that might train um, for bodybuilding with less frequency and less volume with more intensity for like muscle growth. So it's very different. But going back to what I was saying before, you'll see bigger and stronger people that are maybe deadlifting in the 300 plus kilos, or their squat starts getting to be 250 kilos or more. They tend to really have to actually lower down their volume. And lots of times people get concerned about that. Is like, oh well, I have a slower rate of progress. I'm like, but you're getting hurt right now and you can't sustain that. Like you get like 5 pounds up and then you go right
Mm.
10 pounds down because your training approach was unsustainable. And having that more long-term perspective with your programming is absolutely just really key with everything that we are doing. So I've had Lyle McDonald on here several times. That's one of his main things is the moderate volumes tend to win out in the long term. And I love your post about that tape, or not the tape measure, the ruler, and like the few
Yeah.
millimeters
Mm.
that we are arguing over. And I think
Mm.
that's actually very true with like strength too, because how much more are you really getting from doing an extra 5 sets? Because we know
Mm.
that there's a very, relation volume kind of goes up to a certain point, and then there's this like flat land with like nothing happens, but fatigue goes up, and it's
Yeah.
it's more like recovery time. So like, how do you sort of identify that at that point in time for your clients where um it's a lot of people get really, enthusiastic about their products, that they want to do more and more and more and more. How do you sort of keep clients out of that, that flatlining stage where like they're just doing more volume and like less fatigue, and more so in that, we're just kind of in that spot where you're maximizing gains but not really getting excessive fatigue?
I just tend to start off everyone at the most minimalistic program possible for them that they can mentally handle, because or a lot of my clients are high achievers and just want to get the maximum out of everything in life. And my coaching philosophy is to, focus on return on effort. So if you do more and get diminishing returns from everything you add, then eventually you're going to run out of time or energy or recoverability. And so starting at the low end at least ensures that you have room to add more. But if you start at the higher end, where do you go from there? Because then you're unavoidable going to have to scale down your volume if you can't recover from it, or even worse, if you get injured. What do you do then? Then you have to backtrack and start all over again. So it's a mental game for most that they just have to trust me, and I just start people off with like 1 or 2 sets. Two's a maximal or one hard set, depending on the experience of the client. So some are you can see from the training log, because I have people send me their previous training logs and programs. And if you have someone, the program calls for 3 sets of 10 and you consistently see them doing 10, 10, 10, and perhaps it could be that they're very slow twitch dominant and have insane work capacity, but most of the time they're not really pushing with high effort. So I try to teach them or recalibrate their ability to push with high effort first. And then we can play around with reps in reserve because we can't really discuss volume or frequency without considering proximity to failure or reps in reserve. And starting off with that, some are really surprised that they're able to gain really well on just 1 set. And I've had clients tell me, after 12 weeks that they almost feel like they wasted the last 5 to 10 years by just training so much, spending hours and hours in the gym, and now they're getting way more out of way less. So it's kind of a mindfuck for most that, oh my God. Um, it's like you discover that you've been working 60-hour weeks to make minimum wage, and then suddenly you start integrating Tim Ferriss's 4-hour work week, and you 10x your income or something. It's like cracking the code on how to get the most out of the least. And then, of course, if you're not happy with doing 1 to 2 sets, well, let's see what happens if we add another set. So it's a trial and error process, and I work with people for a minimum of 12 weeks because you need at least 3 to 4 weeks at any given combination of reps, sets, and frequency to be able to evaluate whether it's doing the job or not. Also because life happens. And, if you're going through a particularly stressful period, or if you haven't been sleeping or eating well, then that will obviously be constraints to your progress. So we need to take all of those things into account. But then we try to scale up the volume, not on everything, but let's pick 1 or 2 muscle groups and add more volume there and see, do you actually get more out of doing double or even triple the volume? Because going from 2 sets to 3 sets is like 50% increase in
Okay.
volume. And going from 1 to 2 sets, obviously 100%. But, again, you can just see whether adding 1 or 2 more sets is actually increasing the rate of progress. Usually it doesn't. You get the same for some muscle groups, depending on their ability to scale their effort and tolerate volume and recover from volume, because that's kind of the missing link in all of these discussions, where you're just looking at short-term studies and
Right.
averages across different training populations and experience levels and all of that, and exercises and programs and whatever. But you can't extrapolate that into infinity. So once you're working with an individual, then we have to see on, for you, how well do you recover um, after a given amount of volume and rep range and proximity to failure. And from that, we can decide the individualized approach for you. And that may also change over time as the body changes over time. That's pretty much the best way to go about it. Whereas most are just looking for that perfect program or combination of sets and reps out there on the internet or in some study. And that's going to be a game of chasing your own tail for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I think one thing is that if you're making any sort of progress, that's like predictable, especially once you're past the beginner stage. Like Bryce Lewis, who's well-known powerlifting coach, he said you're probably basically just about as close to that optimal that you're seeking if you're able to make that consistent long-term progress. And like what you said, there's probably more of a cost of being like, well, maybe if I just add a little bit more or whatever, and I fall into this trap a lot of times too, because I'm sure that you said, you work with high achievers. A lot of all this does have to do with personality type. It's like we want to do more and we want to feel like we're working really hard. But lots of times with my clients, it is like that. You said it's like I was doing all this volume. I was training with this really high amount of like effort on my powerlifting movements. I wasn't like recovering very well. Then I was trying to spam all my accessory volume, and I was just getting tendonitis, and I wasn't really noticing I was getting stronger. It was just like I'm just coming in and training, and I think there's a lot of like like you said that mind fuckery with lowering down that work is like a lot of fitness culture is like very conservative and like work hard and pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and that obviously necessary at like a certain level. But I would
Mm.
argue, and honestly I think it's way harder to push yourself really hard um on a couple of movements and really just working hard. I like how Chester Sokolowski was kind of saying that it really illustrates this a lot, that muscle protein synthesis really diminishes the further that more sets that you do, and you're creating more muscle damage, and that's harder for your body to recover and grow and get stronger. And if we can
Mm.
actually keep it more to that minimum amount and you're seeing progress, he thinks that that's where you're going to be seeing your best, not muscle and strength gains in the long term. And then if you're not seeing the progress that you want with that same program, and you're feeling like you're recovering just fine, it's like what you said, like one set, if you're doing 10 sets, is still plenty to get
Mm.
you working out. A lot of people times they're like, I'm plateaued. They add like 5 sets a week, and then they maladapt and get
Mm.
hurt or something.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And
So
I even remember James Krieger, who wrote a volume Bible and did the statistics for Brad Schoenfeld's study, and he's been saying, he even wrote an article on his site. Now he's doing other stuff, but he said on a couple of podcasts that he was training with high volumes and frequencies, and doing well on that. But after COVID hit and the gyms closed, and he had to take a couple of months off training, came back to the gym and figured he would just start at one set and add more only if and when he got stuck on that. And he just surprised himself that he blew past his previous best doing just really low volumes, like one or two sets. So I think the pendulum swings. I mean, I've been doing this for almost 30 years now, and it's been going from low volume to high volume and low frequency to high frequency and everything in between. So it's just this giant time repeats itself over and over again. And I think what's missing from the whole thing is that you have to be curious about your own logbook instead of chasing the perfect study or meta review or regression or expert to tell you what to do. Because that kind of, it's like asking chat gpt, how much sunlight should I expose my skin to get a suntan? Well, you kind of have to go out there and try if you're really uh, pale and haven't exposed your skin to sun. And are you living in Spain or in Norway? uh, what's your history and what's your location? Is it in the middle of the day or in the evening? So all these things matter. And suddenly on training, everyone is losing their mind because, well, this study said that and that expert said that. And it's all personal bias. It's all, what demographic are we studying, for how long, what exercises? So many variables to take into account. And you can run statistical sorcery on the data and tease out these nice little curves that suddenly should inform us on an individual level how to train. And to me, as a coach, that's just mind-blowingly stupid, to be honest.
yeah, I think that like comparison is a something that a lot of it's natural as humans, but understanding that, especially with this, you mentioned that genetics are such a big deal with this. They explain a lot of the results that people get. In fact, almost all of the variation that people do see. And everybody, you'll see some people that like do respond well to doing slightly higher amounts of volume, but also those people tend to train with like less intensity. And that's
Hmm.
probably a personality type thing. It's just a preference thing versus somebody like myself. I've always played sports. I've always had that mindset. I'm like, I'm going to train really hard. I don't have that off switch. I'm very type A neurotic. And like for me, it's like I don't need to do a lot of volume. I've never needed to do a lot of volume to see progress. Every time I try doing more work, it's like I'm like, oh, well, this other person is doing work, or like, I think in powerlifting coaching, a lot of times people have this notion that, well, you have to do this amount of frequency on this lift to see progress, or you have to do whatever in order to like see progress. And I don't have to do anything. I think that this is so based around like principles, and I think it's important to have like some sort of a philosophy around training. And you clearly have your own, but it has to be objective and built in like reality, not in like what you want reality to be and what you want your clients to fit in as a box. Um, I guess going off of that, Borge, asking about like you mentioned like training frequency. Um, I know that there has been some data about it mattering somewhat for muscle growth and for strength gains. But I have also seen other takes that it matters. It's more about just total weekly volume. That does dictate the magnitude of the results in adaptation. But what have you seen in your practice as training for frequency and its role in hypertrophy? And say you have two volume equated programs. Would somebody see better progress with lower or higher frequencies?
I think for hypertrophy, I've kind of been a high frequency guy for many, many years. I was the one who kind of started talking about the Norwegian Frequency Project, and I come from hypertrophy specific training, HST, which is full body 3 times per week. So I've always kind of gravitated towards that, but I've also tried upper lowers and push pull legs and even bro splits, and everything works. So it's just kind of a what dose do you apply to each workout? Essentially, what's the volume you're doing, and within that volume, what's the proximity to failure? What's the effort? And then on an individual basis, how soon can you recover from that? And I completely agree with Chester Sokolowski that at any given point is like exposing your skin to sunlight. You get some melanin production, but you also get a sunburn and inflammation. So you can't really go out into the sun until the sunburn is repaired and inflammation is diminished again. So it's the same thing with muscle growth. Some I think are conflating both in research and observational that muscle damage equals growth when it's actually inflammation and swelling. There's still, debates around that. I just, on an individual level, if you're not really getting any significant improvement in strength from a given volume, then how can you know it's actual contractile tissue? Because contractile tissue is what's lifting the weight. So just the interaction between volume and frequency. We can't discuss one without the other. And the frequency is determined by the volume you're doing and how well you can recover from that. And that's both going to be individual and on individual muscle groups. Because low twitch fibers have higher mitochondrial density and can recover faster. You can do more work in a given workout, whereas more fast twitch and explosive type training will incur more muscle damage sooner and faster. So it's probably going to take longer to recover from that. So again, I just encourage experimenting. I do prefer to start off with lower volumes and high-ish frequencies, so up to every other day per muscle group,
Mm.
and see how far can you push the volume until that pushes you into some recovery issues or inflammation, and scale back, reduce the frequency, add rest days, and then see can you scale up volume again, and how far can you scale the volume up. And generally, what you see, I've been working with some clients for several years, and you see there's like a range. There's not like one perfect combination. And the range applies across different muscle groups. So some tolerate more volume and frequency, and others are the opposite. So it's kind of all over the map there. But in general, I don't like training a muscle group less than 2 times per week or every 3 to 5 days. I do tend to think, at least for hypertrophy, that you can sort of lose out on some adaptive capacity or ability to grow muscle. I'm not sure I buy into some are saying that you begin to lose muscle after 48 hours of not lifting or stimulating muscle growth. Whereas that might be true, I haven't really been able to confirm if that's, 100% true. It could be that on a molecular level, we begin some atrophy, but it's going to be really slow. So it's not like if you wait an extra day and now you're losing so much muscle mass that everything is gone. But we do see an interaction between the volume and how soon you expose that muscle to that same volume again. So there's going to be a boost in muscle growth, and then you slowly atrophy. And if you wait too long before you train that muscle again, then you're essentially just spinning your wheels. So again, the interaction, some amount of volume, and then once you have recovered from that volume, you can apply a stimulus again and grow. So I generally think, just kind of an educated guess here and from observation, that 1 to 2 sets 3 times per week is probably better than 6 to 10 sets once per week, simply from the interaction between volume and frequency. And because I think the literature and the meta regressions and meta reviews are not accounting for total weekly volume, because at higher volumes, higher frequency won't be working really well because you're simply not recovered before training that muscle again. So it kind of skews the results in favor of weekly volume being better. But because you're getting the most stimulus out of the first set, the more first sets you can do every week, I do tend to think that's better as long as you can recover from that. But the recovery part is where the whole individualization process needs to be focused.
It's interesting that we talk about, the atrophy point, because I know that the literature on tapers for powerlifting competitions, for example, like they do lose a little bit of muscle, but their strength is maintained. So like, it's in my mind, I'm like, I agree with you. Like, it's probably like not significant enough to really, worry about it that much, because if, powerlifters lost a significant amount of muscle mass in that time, they would not have better numbers from a taper. Um, I guess my question going off of that is, when you add in enhancements, PEDs through that, do you think that it shifts the conversation a little bit to, maybe it mattering even less? People see a lot of times in these bigger bodybuilders that do more like the bro splits and they work out better. And my assumption is because of, you're basically always having a heightened muscle protein synthesis effect above baseline when you are on, super physiological level of steroids versus if you are natural not. And then like probably in that case, it comes down to, more so connected to tissue issues in that case. Because like obviously they're doing like the bro split, you are going to get more connective tissue damage, and that extends out the frequency or the recovery time, because that's very slow to remodel, like you said. Um, does that make sense? What I said, like, do you think it matters that much between natural and enhanced?
Yeah, I'm actually, I have this theory that some will probably disagree with, but just going back to the Bassin study, looking at the dose response curve to testosterone and comparing exercise and non-exercise. And if you look at the muscle mass grown from just using testosterone 600 milligrams and not training, and the group training, and then look at the group doing 600 milligrams and training, is almost a perfect sum. But it's a sum of the muscle growth from testosterone and the muscle growth from training. And that's sort of the total. So testosterone builds muscle just sitting on the couch, doing nothing. Training adds muscle separately from testosterone. So I tend to think that we should figure out what works best for someone not using anything, and then apply increasing milligrams to get, the total response that we're after. Having said that, it's obviously true that PEDs tend to enhance connective tissue turnover rates, and you're able to recover from more volume when you're adding milligrams. The more milligrams you do up to a certain point, because there's going to be diminishing returns at some point. And then you have the ability to increase like the swelling, glycogen, and blood volume, and fluids, and everything. So, and that kind of makes the effect more dramatic from any given volume. So the pump is increased. But I still think that's conflating people's perspective on volume being so much better when you're using, because is it actual tissue, muscle growth. And I tend to think it's not all muscle growth. It's probably also some swelling. So for the visual effect of it, if you're a bodybuilder and you're going on stage, then probably that's a good idea to pursue closer to, competition, volumizing your training. But for long-term muscle growth, I just don't think we move the frequency or volume ceiling or threshold up all that much just by adding milligrams. I think the milligrams are building muscle in addition to the training you're doing. It's kind of amplifying the magnitude of the muscle growth you would be getting otherwise. But I have trained one guy competing. I placed top 6 in the Olympia many years ago. One guy did really well at the amateur scene, and he eventually went on to win Mr. Universe. Many years ago, those who, there are some listening to this that will probably know who it is, but I'm not going to name drop. And for him, we scaled down the milligrams and the use of what he was doing, because I thought that was just way too much, by 60%. And he was doing low volume, high frequency training, hitting every muscle group 2 to 3 times per week with just 2 to 3 up to 4 sets. And he increased his stage weight from 1 year to the next by 8 kilos, and he was in
Wow.
better condition. A lot of food in there, but he just stayed lean throughout the whole thing. He never really gained a lot of body fat. And that just, to me, spoke volumes about, optimizing the training, and obviously optimizing the use of the PEDs as well. But he was doing way too much and not recovering well and not sleeping well due to the high loads and loads of androgens he was using. So just optimizing everything and looking at it from, well, let's add drugs to an already effective training program. And his gains just took off. He got so strong on some movements that we couldn't. We just had to stay above 10 reps for most of it, and actually limit his loads, and just focus on moving slower to avoid connective tissue damage. So it's I've seen this many times that people have responded really well to high volumes. But once you ensure the effort and you increase the frequency and you lower the volume, they just get way better gains. And now we're talking permanent, long-lasting, sustainable gains instead of that immediate pump-based swelling that tends to look very impressive in the mirror but doesn't really lift the weights. So that's my perspective on it.
Right. I think that how you said about it's just trying to enhance your overall programming, and once you found sort of like what works, and like, this kind of goes back into the whole discussion about how, you should probably be training for some amount of time before, like, you hop on. You should probably understand like what you respond well to, and have a good overall just general structure as a natural person, because a lot of times people use PEDs as a way to sort of make up for their shitty programming and their shitty dieting, when
Mm.
it should be the exact opposite. Like we said, it's complementing what you're doing to basically make the response faster. And I've personally seen in my experience from working with enhanced athletes, like when you said that it does, increase their volume ceiling, to some extent, yes. I don't think it's meaningful though. I think it's like maybe like a couple sets a week or something like that. Because what
Yeah.
I've noticed is that it's way easier for like when you're on, it's that much easier to push harder. Your pain tolerance is higher. Your ability to coordinate with your muscles is higher. And each unit volume you do becomes even more effective with the androgens. Um, and so lots of times, especially on PEDs, if somebody's not making progress, is a very rare case I'm going to be like, we need more. I'm probably going to scale back a
Yeah.
little bit because in my mind, I'm like,
Mhm.
well, like if you're not recovering, recovery should really never be like the issue on drugs. And if you're not making progress, like it's likely due to doing a little bit too much. Because like what you said, kind of like increases like the bandwidth of like what works, right? If you're not making progress, you're probably so far over. I think that's a lot of times like what intermediate lifters get into is like we have the idea we have to increase volume, increase volume, increase volume. They end up in this really high amount of volume, but they're scared of lowering it down when lots of times, across the training career volume goes down. And your point about, with milligrams and that recovery, in my own personal experience, if I'm running too high of loads, I don't get stronger because I can't sleep. I'm always like anxious and I don't feel good. And you'll see this with a lot of powerlifters. They'll say like, I was taking like 2 grams of steroids and then I went down to like 800 milligrams and I saw better progress because I was
Yeah.
better able to recover because, you see a lot of times, and God bless him. I know there's a lot of stuff going on with like, him, but, I mean, there's a lot of things we don't know, but like Nick Walker, like he got really big in a really short amount of time. He's paying the price for it right now. I think long term, it's about health too with PEDs. I always like I remember with Broderick Chavez, and what he says is health is permissive of performance. If you're not healthy, you're not going to be able to build muscle well. You're not going to get stronger. Like it's going to be a losing battle. And I looked at enhanced powerlifters programs. It's so minimal. It's not a
Mm.
lot. And it's more natural. I think it's probably because the muscle protein synthesis effect is higher, and so we just get more of a training response rather than these natural guys. They're just like, oh my gosh, like I got to do anything possible to get the gains. And you'll see lots of enhanced guys that I squat once a week, I deadlift once a week, I bench press twice a week.
Yeah.
I'm strong. Um, I know that you had one experience with one of your powerlifters who you had him do like you incorporate higher reps in his program, and he benched like something crazy, like what 230 plus kilos from that approach. And so I want to ask about the benefits of incorporating some board of both like low reps and obviously and versus high reps and like what you would classify as low reps and high reps in a program. One thing I personally noticed from incorporating that, like there's obviously different adaptations that happen from it. I found that people tend to be able to actually tolerate slightly more volume or not, or maybe just like recover better from the volume that they're doing with more of that variation in rep schemes. But what have you seen in your experience from, what are some benefits of, modifying this stimulus?
Yeah. I've seen the same thing, and I believe it's again chasing your own tail if you think there's one perfect rep range. And now the whole thing about the paranoid fear of fatigue or muscle damage uh, is kind of misguided, and I believe based off of studies on not really well trained people over the long term. So I have data looking at really strong advanced powerlifters and physique competitors, and they tend to get more muscle damage at higher loads and low reps. Whereas more intermediates and untrained, they're kind of the opposite. So uh, I think of it as uh, a chain. So there's going to be links in the chain, depending on what you're focusing on, that's going to get stronger. And if you forget or if you don't maintain other links in the chain, they're going to get weak and eventually the chain is going to break. So we can look at this from a bioenergetic perspective as well. the body is a system with many different moving parts, and the muscle is just one plastic tissue, a dumb piece of meat that contracts and can grow larger within a short time frame. But as the previously mentioned, connective tissue and joints need to keep up. We have nutrient and oxygen supply to the muscle. We have the cardiovascular system that's part of the recovery process between workouts. We have inflammatory processes. We have all of these enzymatic pathways. And, the deeper you go into rabbit holes, the more you understand that there's just more to it than the simple, perfect rep range and volume for that muscle. There's so many moving parts here that needs to catch up. So what I think is happening, and also looking from the periodization research, is that the more you just singularly focus on one part, emphasizing just lower reps or single type of volume or frequency, you will eventually accumulate some bottlenecks elsewhere. So that's where I think I don't necessarily believe you need to do all rep ranges at the same time in the program. I think you can, for instance, do a few weeks of strength emphasis and then do like more moderate to high reps for a while. I've been for many years just playing around with a simple linear periodization where I start off at lighter loads and high reps. And I mean, it's a time-tested Ed Cohen type programming that tends to work really well and has been working really well for decades. And end up with heavier loads and low reps. And then I add in some drop sets and higher up sets here and there to at least maintain those adaptations gained from the first part of the cycle. And yeah, real world results just speak against all of these strong convictions of the perfect rep range and that high reps are so fatiguing and it's just holding back your progress. Because the two case studies I posted, one Swedish bench press specialist, Joseph Eriksson, and he's also a coach, and he's been coaching several elite powerlifters to international gold medals using that same approach, just using a lot of high rep training for powerlifters. And there are many examples of the same thing. Jesus Varela, he calls his method Bilbo method. One high rep set followed by 3 to 4, 8 to 12 rep sets with a slightly heavier load and just scales that up linearly over time. And both of them, separate from each other, as reported, that they increased their bench by 80 to 100 kilos over 2 to 3 years after having been stuck for 2 to 3 years, doing only powerlifting, typical powerlifting training. So I think, again, real world results speak louder than whatever some influencer that's good at reading studies claims to be the truth. And I just completely don't want to take part of that at all. That whole dogmatic lack of nuance, thinking that this is the perfect way to train for everyone all the time.
Yeah, it's interesting that you said like, the whole thing about low reps being or high reps being like more fatiguing than low reps. I'm like, you can adapt to like lots of different things, right? And that's what probably determines the majority of fatigue is like what you're used to doing. Like,
Mm.
if I go from, doing like a quote unquote volume block and I'm doing like sets of 5 to like 10 only, and then I go and try doing like single like sets of like 1 to 5, I'm probably going to feel really fatigued if I'm not
Mm.
smart about how I slowly acclimate load in that rep range. But like a lot of times it just comes down to like I think people like to blame their lack of progress on like this is the reason. Like there's like it's kind of like with like pain, it's like if you go online or it's like, oh, you gotta stretch more, this muscle is tight, and I'm like that's probably not it. You're
Mm.
probably fine. There are just some complicated biopsychosocial reasons for this pain. But I think that in regards to like incorporating more of a wide variety of stimulus in, I think it just allows you to, I guess, just keep a little bit more of like an open mind. And we're just chasing progress at the end of the day. Like you said, that doesn't matter how you get there. Nobody cares if you're doing sets of 20 to get jacked
Mm.
versus sets of five. I always tell my clients, whenever, especially like if there are, going back to like the volume discussion, or if they're doing something that's different and feel like they're not working as hard. I'm like, nobody cares about how hard you're working, especially you, if you're not seeing the results that you're after. And I agree with you in terms of like that dogmaticism. Um, it doesn't do anybody any good. It doesn't move. Um, this doesn't move anybody forward. In fact, I think that's the reason for a lot of just general issues that we have. But as far as low reps and higher reps go, um, I think it's interesting that you mentioned, the other things other than just like the muscle, because like, say that you're doing higher reps and then you become, you have increased capitalization of the muscles. Maybe you can like recover better from your training in general because you have increased oxygen and increased nutrient partitioning. Because I believe that like in order to have like a significant effect on that, there needs to be like some of those adaptations happening. If you're only doing like low reps, that's probably a big reason why lots of powerlifters, even if they're gaining weight, they don't see a lot of muscle growth. But then they start
Mm.
adding in more of that higher reps training, and I would assume that with your powerlifters, they were incorporating those higher reps, they got a lot more jacked too with those higher reps.
Oh yeah, definitely. And they also did a lot of research on blood flow restriction training at Olympic Center in Norway with top powerlifters, and uh, these were guys that hadn't been really gaining a lot on their maxes for a while, and their body weight and by extension muscle mass had been stagnant for a while. And just after introducing blood flow restriction training, RF training for a couple of weeks, suddenly their gains took off again once they get back into their normal training. And the same thing with MyRep training, which is, sort of blood flow restriction because you're intermittently resting and then training again. So you kind of get some of the same effects, internal occlusion. And I've seen it many times over just dramatically improve both muscle growth and strength gains in different types of contexts. So there's something going on there, and I don't think we should be waiting for research to study it and prove it before we actually apply it. I'm just not a big fan of putting labels and boxes on everything and rules, and we should all follow the rules because this is optimal and everything else is stupid and a waste of time. And I don't think in any area, whether it's business or life or training or nutrition, there are no rules that work for everyone all the time. And um, putting people inside of these narrow frames of rules and restrictions takes away the fun, takes away the ability to experiment, being curious about what actually works. Like there's this single path that we should all be following from point A to point B. You should never deviate from that. And being paranoid about stress and fatigue. And I mean, how do we even get stronger and more resilient? By uh, willingly exposing ourselves to stress and fatigue. That's the only way to get strong. You can't avoid stress and fatigue in your life because you're just going to get weak. Everything in nature requires stress and fatigue to get stronger. A tree not exposed to wind will eventually fall down because it doesn't form roots in the ground. So, from a philosophical and observational and just a general understanding of how things work, we have to willingly apply stress and fatigue and then rest and allow the organism or system to adapt and get stronger, not be paranoid of it.
Right. I've always told my clients that fatigue isn't a bad thing. That's it's just a byproduct of what we're doing and a byproduct of effective training. The matter is that it's managed with our training program, with how we are eating, with how we're sleeping, with our how we like how we try to manage our life stress. And
Mm.
yeah, if you try to like people hear about fatigue like, oh my gosh, I have to minimize this. I'm like, lots of times the powerlifters, like when I'm the strongest, I feel pretty beat up. It's just how
Mm.
it is. Like it's a part of the process, but that, my fatigue is high, but guess what? My fitness is higher. And that's what we call a peak. And all we're
Yeah.
trying to do when we're tapering off fatigue, that really needs to be that high. And then hopefully we may maintain that fitness or we have a slight super compensation, increasing our odds of, a good competition for performance. So totally agree with you there. I guess just last thing I wanted to ask is sort of the concept of exercise selection and stability. And the example that I gave you was, a dumbbell press is less, stable than a machine chest press. But, once you get more skilled at it, does it really even matter? Like, because I think a lot of times you'll see bodybuilders now, like my observation has been, I think you can maybe do a little bit more volume and recover from it if there's less stabilization demands. But over time, like it might not matter as much, but I'm unsure. This is hence the question.
Mm. Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure I have the perfect answer to that. I think it's individual biomechanics. I know for me, anything dumbbell related, even though I've been doing it for quite a while, my triceps just take over. So it doesn't really build my pecs at all. And that's the same thing with a standard barbell bench press. But give me like a converging chest press and something very stable, and add in some pec flies, and suddenly I was able to improve what's been like a weak point for many, many years. So you have to understand what's the limiting part of that movement, because the muscle that's going to be trained is going to get stronger over time, and the weakest link is going to keep getting weaker, so it's not able to catch up. Then you have to figure out what exercises can I use to hit that weaker muscle group and make that strong. So I've been able to improve my ability to use my pecs in a normal bench press. But if I just kept doing like a dumbbell or barbell bench press for eternity, then that would never happen. So I would have to target the muscle group that's underdeveloped, and we call it stubborn, but I just think it's a matter of exercise selection and figuring out that sweet spot in frequency, volume, and effort to improve the rate of growth in that muscle group. And obviously, there's some unavoidable genetic limitations to how big that muscle can get, but that's what bodybuilding is about. It's about figuring out how you can improve weak muscle groups to at least make them bigger versions of themselves, even though you're probably not going to have Arnold Schwarzenegger's biceps insertions and peaks, but it's still going to be possible to build your biceps if you just train them correctly with the correct exercises. So, in general, to answer your questions, I think for most, adding stability is uh, definitely an advantage, but training more unstable or free weight exercises is still valuable and shouldn't be ignored. So again, the dogmatic black or white thinking, I'm not a big fan of. I still use, free weight exercises because it's a more natural movement, whereas machines lock you more into a certain bar path or movement path, and it's not always optimal for your physique. So I think we should just look at what we need to improve and what exercises you can do without hurting yourself or getting connective tissue problems over time, and what you can consistently add reps or load or both in.
Right. So basically just pay attention to your own individual response. And if I got that right, we say that the mind muscle connection then like matters, like how well you can feel like a connection to like the target muscle that you are training is like, and like for example, like a squat for me is I have really long femurs and short torso. Like I
Mm.
know my quads are being worked heavily. There's no way that they're not, but like I literally feel like all the fatigue in my back. Like
Yeah,
never do I get
same.
done with a squat workout. Am I like, damn, my quads are lit. I'm like, I need a wheelchair. That sucks.
Mm. Same here. Yeah. Yeah, again, individual biomechanics. Why just keep doing the exercise if you want big quads and all you're getting is lower back injuries and a big ass? Then perhaps you should consider doing something else.
Right. Well, Borg, I really wanted to thank you for coming on and having this discussion. Again, I really appreciate it. If people want to follow you or hire you for coaching or anything else, where should they head?
You can find most of my content on Instagram. I started posting on LinkedIn. It's perhaps more oriented towards business high achievers. The MyReps ebook I would highly recommend. It's my magnum opus, found at myreps.com, where you get a 240-page ebook. You get programs and walkthrough videos and demonstrations and all that. So it's a steal, I think. And then I have my own homepage at borgefagerli.com.
Right. I'll make sure I include all those links in the show details. Thank you guys for listening to the podcast. Talk to you guys in the next one.